I stood by the granite island inside my kitchen, staring across the room at my 32-year-old daughter, Natalie, and felt the last remaining bonds of my paternal devotion snap completely under the heavy weight of absolute disbelief. I had looked her right in the eyes and reminded her that this was the exact morning of my older brother's funeral. The man who had literally saved my life was being laid to rest in the damp, cold earth of a Chicago cemetery, and I desperately needed to be there to stand beside his wooden casket, to pay my final respects, and to say my last honorable goodbye. I had foolishly assumed that somewhere beneath her polished exterior, there would be at least a single shred of human empathy, a flicker of natural compassion for the aging father who had spent 4 grueling decades building her world from scratch. Instead, Natalie simply crossed her arms over her designer blouse, tilted her chin with an expression of icy indifference, and looked at me with a coldness that froze the blood inside my veins. "You still have to do it, Dad," she said, her voice entirely devoid of warmth or hesitation. "There is absolutely no other choice. We are dropping them off right now, and you are taking care of them." I remained frozen by the countertop, stunned beyond measure, entirely unable to reconcile the callous woman standing before me with the sweet little girl I had raised. I looked past her shoulder, trying desperately to search her eyes for any sign of regret, but all I saw was a selfish, entitled stranger who viewed my profound personal grief as nothing more than an inconvenient scheduling conflict. My brother Bill was not merely a sibling to me. He was the bedrock of my entire existence, the sole undeniable reason that I was still breathing the clean air of this earth. As the silence in the kitchen stretched taut, my mind instantly pulled me 40 years back through the mists of time, returning to a bitter, freezing November morning in 1985 that had permanently altered both of our destinies. We were young men back then, working on a massive commercial construction site, right in the bustling heart of downtown Chicago. High above me, suspended from the massive steel arm of a heavy tower crane, swung a 2-ton structural steel beam destined for the core skeleton of the skyscraper. I did not hear the high-tensile steel cable snap. The roar of the diesel excavators and the howling wind completely swallowed the sharp, metallic crack of the failing rigging. I was dead right there where I stood. There was no humanly possible way to scramble out of the 6-foot pit in the fraction of a second required to escape. But my brother Bill saw it. Without a moment of hesitation or self-preservation, my brother sprinted across the uneven, frozen concrete slab, launched his entire body into the air, and tackled me violently out of the target zone, right as the steel struck the earth. He threw me clear into the soft mud just outside the trench, but in doing so he left himself exposed. The heavy, 2-ton steel beam crashed down across the edge of the pit, and the crushing, unforgiving impact caught both of his legs, pinning him against the concrete forms with the force of a falling locomotive. The sound of his bones shattering under that iron mass is a nightmare audio frequency that has haunted my sleep every single winter for 4 decades. He spent months encased in plaster and steel halo braces, fighting off agonizing infections and enduring physical therapy sessions that left him drenched in cold sweat and biting through wooden dowels to keep from screaming. He survived, but he paid an astronomical price for my future. He suffered the chronic, throbbing agony of those crushed limbs every single day in stoic silence, never once complaining, never once making me feel indebted, just grateful that his baby brother was safe. And now, 40 years after that freezing morning in the Chicago dirt, that exact same little girl, whose existence was made entirely possible by Bill's shattered bones, was standing right inside my kitchen, coldly denying me the fundamental right to attend his burial. She was demanding that I skip the funeral of the honorable hero who gave her a father, all because she refused to adjust her personal weekend schedule. My voice trembled with a mixture of raw heartbreak and slowly igniting indignation as I asked her how she could possibly be so heartless. I asked her how she could stand in my home on the darkest, most agonizing morning of my entire life and treat my brother's final farewell as if it were a casual dinner appointment I could simply cancel. That was the precise moment her husband Derek stepped forward from the entryway, intruding into the conversation with his customary arrogance. He was a man obsessed with image, status, and the relentless accumulation of superficial luxury, and he had always treated me with a thin veneer of condescending tolerance, looking down at my scarred, calloused hands and faded flannel shirts, as if I were just a foolish, outdated old relic who did not understand how the modern world operated. Derek looked at me with that signature, patronizing smirk plastered across his clean-shaven face, let out a long, highly exaggerated sigh, and shook his head as though he were dealing with a stubborn toddler refusing to eat vegetables. "Harrison, please do not make this all about you," Derek said, his tone dripping with smooth, rehearsed corporate condescension. "You have to look at the bigger picture right now. If Natalie and I do not fly out to Manhattan right now and personally close this deal, the company goes under completely. We lose absolutely everything: our equity, our market share, our entire financial standing." Before I could even process the audacity of his business justification, Natalie immediately chimed in, stepping right up into my personal space, with her eyes flashing with calculated emotional venom. She raised her right hand and aggressively pointed her manicured index finger directly at the center of my chest, tapping against my flannel shirt for physical emphasis. "Are you really going to stand there and choose a dead man over your living, breathing grandchildren? Dad?" she demanded, her voice rising in pitch to strike the exact frequency designed to trigger my deepest fatherly anxieties. "But your grandchildren, Leo and Mia, are alive, and they desperately need you right this very second." The guilt trip was heavy, suffocating, and executed with terrifying, surgical precision. They knew with absolute certainty that I would gladly walk barefooted through a burning building or crawl across broken glass to protect Leo and Mia from experiencing even a moment of instability or suffering. Leo was 8 years old, a quiet, highly observant boy who inherited my fascination with mechanical structures and building things, while little Mia was just 6, a vibrant, joyful little girl whose innocent giggles brought pure light into my quiet home after my wife passed away. They were happily engrossed in building a massive, multi-tiered tower out of my custom wooden blocks, completely oblivious to the toxic, poisonous vitriol spewing from their parents' mouths right inside the kitchen. My heart physically ached inside my ribcage, feeling as though it were being squeezed in a heavy iron vise. Would these entitled, callous parents actually leave them alone in the house, or drag them through chaotic airport terminals while spewing resentment? I swallowed the heavy, bitter lump of grief blocking my throat, clenched my rough, scarred hands into tight fists until my knuckles turned stark white against my sun-damaged skin, and slowly, heavily nodded my head. "Fine," I whispered, the word tasting like ash on my tongue. "I will stay. I will take the kids. Go to your meeting in New York. Go and save your company." I looked at them, half expecting at least a brief expression of relief, perhaps a quiet word of basic human gratitude, or a belated offer of condolences for the brother I was now sacrificing my final farewell to honor. But there was nothing. Not a single word of comfort, not a whispered thank you, not even a sympathetic pat on the shoulder. Derek simply checked the time on his bulky 18-karat gold wristwatch, grabbed the handle of his expensive leather briefcase from the kitchen island, and immediately pivoted toward the front hallway without uttering a sound. Then, without turning her head to make eye contact with me again, she marched out the front door, right behind her husband. I stood frozen in the entryway, listening to their rapid footsteps practically jogging down the long concrete driveway. I slowly walked out onto the covered front porch, holding my grandson Leo securely by his small, warm hand, and stood in absolute silence as the sleek, metallic silver car reversed aggressively out of the driveway and sped away down the quiet, tree-lined suburban street. A hollow, devastating ache settled deep inside my chest, cold and heavy as a block of winter ice. And simultaneously, with a grief just as agonizing, I was mourning the daughter I mistakenly thought I had raised. The realization that the loving, empathetic child I had nurtured for 3 decades had completely vanished, replaced by a ruthless, entitled woman who viewed my unconditional love as a free, exploitative resource. I felt utterly defeated, my shoulders slumping under the crushing, suffocating weight of my own family's callous manipulation. The crisp morning air was dead and quiet, save for the rustling of dry autumn leaves scraping along the sidewalk. But then, the heavy silence was abruptly broken by a gentle, persistent tug on the fabric of my sleeve. I looked down. He tilted his head slightly and asked me a simple, straightforward question. A question that instantly stopped my breath and made the warm blood coursing through my veins run completely cold. "Grandpa," Leo asked softly, his young voice carrying clearly through the crisp morning air, "if Mommy and Daddy are flying to a boring office building in New York to do business meetings, why did they pack their snowboards and those shiny ski goggles into the trunk of the car this morning?" I completely froze on the wooden steps. The innocent, observant inquiry from my 8-year-old grandson hung in the cold autumn air between us, heavy, sharp, and cutting as a shattered pane of window glass. Snowboards, ski goggles. I stared down into Leo's wide, blinking eyes, desperately searching my mind for a logical explanation, waiting for a plausible answer that I suddenly did not possess. Why would a corporate real estate broker and his wife, supposedly rushing to a life-or-death financial merger in downtown Manhattan, where corporate suits and boardrooms dictated survival, pack heavy winter sports equipment designed specifically for alpine slopes? My heart, which had been heavy and sluggish with sorrow only moments before, suddenly began to pound an aggressive, frantic rhythm against my ribcage. Every single instinct honed over 40 years of engineering practice screamed that something was catastrophically wrong with the structural integrity of the story I had just been fed. I forced the muscles of my face to relax, painting on a gentle, reassuring grandfatherly smile for the young boy so as not to alarm his innocent mind. "Don't you worry about what they packed. Why don't you run back inside and help your little sister finish building that castle before the dragon attacks?" It was a terribly weak, flimsy excuse, but to an 8-year-old boy who trusted his grandfather implicitly, it was entirely sufficient. Leo grinned brightly, let go of my hand, and bounded happily back through the front door into the warm living room to rejoin Mia. I remained outside on the porch for several long, agonizing moments after the door clicked shut. I desperately needed to know the absolute, unvarnished truth right away. I turned around, walked slowly back into the house, and paused in the hallway to ensure both grandchildren were completely, happily occupied with their wooden blocks on the rug. Satisfied that their attention was fully diverted, I quietly slipped into the kitchen and picked up Leo's digital school tablet, which was resting beside the fruit bowl on the polished granite island. 3 years prior, when Leo first started attending day camp, Natalie had proudly set up a comprehensive family tracking and location application across all our personal digital devices. She had boasted loudly during Sunday dinners about how state-of-the-art it was, bragging to her neighborhood friends that this continuous GPS network kept our entire extended family perfectly safe, constantly connected, and entirely accounted for at all hours of the day. I unlocked the screen and opened the tracking application with fingers that trembled slightly against the glass. The high-resolution digital map loaded almost instantly, displaying our neighborhood layout along with small, glowing colored icons representing each family member's registered mobile device. My own icon sat stationary inside the house perimeter, alongside the children's tablets. I quickly navigated across the screen and zoomed right in on the pulsing blue icon representing Derek's primary smartphone. If my son-in-law and daughter were truly racing to O'Hare International Airport to catch an emergency commercial flight to New York City for a high-stakes merger, their digital trajectory would be heading due northwest, following the massive multi-lane artery of the Kennedy Expressway straight toward the international terminals. But as my eyes locked onto the small blue dot glowing on the high-definition display, my breath caught painfully in my throat. They were not moving anywhere near the Kennedy Expressway. They were not within 20 miles of the international airport corridors. They were traveling at 70 miles per hour in the exact opposite direction. I watched, mesmerized by disbelief, as the digital dot glided smoothly along the southbound interstate highway, bypassing every major commercial flight hub in the Chicago metropolitan area. The icon smoothly exited the main highway and navigated directly down the private, highly restricted access road leading toward an exclusive, corporate-only private airfield situated on the wealthy, ultra-affluent western outskirts of the city, a private airstrip used almost exclusively by corporate jet charters, wealthy executives, and private aviation enthusiasts. I tapped directly onto the glowing blue icon representing Derek's phone, accessing the destination and itinerary prediction details that the sophisticated tracking software helpfully compiled, based on their synced email confirmations, digital calendar reservations, and real-time travel history. A small, cheerful notification window popped up across the center of the tablet screen, laying bare the absolute undisputed truth in sharp, high-contrast digital text. The software informed me that Derek and Natalie Cole were currently checked in and scheduled to board a private, luxury twin-engine charter flight departing from Executive Terminal 4. And the confirmed flight destination, printed right below the departure code, was not New York City. It was not a corporate banking hub in Manhattan. The confirmed destination was Aspen, Colorado. I stared down at the bright tablet screen until my aging eyes burned and watered from lack of blinking. The small blue dot pulsed rhythmically against the digital map, glowing like a neon beacon of absolute, unadulterated betrayal, actively mocking my profound grief over my brother's empty grave. Aspen. They were flying to a luxury ski resort in Aspen. A suffocating, highly physical wave of nausea rolled violently through my stomach, twisting my digestive tract into tight, painful knots that made me want to double over. My brain processed the sheer, calculated cruelty of what had just transpired in my kitchen less than 20 minutes ago. They had not simply exaggerated a business problem. They had looked me right in the eyes, deliberately invoked the sacred bleeding memory of my recently deceased brother, shamelessly terrorized me with threats of my grandchildren being thrown out into the streets, and aggressively guilt-tripped me into sacrificing my final, sacred farewell to the man who saved my life. All for what? All so they could skip his funeral, drop their children off for a free 72-hour weekend babysitting service, and fly on a private jet to drink expensive imported champagne and ride snowboards down a luxury mountain slope in Colorado. The sheer, breathtaking magnitude of their emotional depravity sucked the oxygen right out of my lungs. They had ruthlessly weaponized my intense, agonizing grief over Bill's death. They had systematically exploited my unconditional, protective love for Leo and Mia, converting the deepest, most sacred emotional bonds of my life into a convenient, cost-free convenience designed to facilitate their hedonistic leisure. I set the digital tablet down onto the granite countertop with absolute, deliberate precision. I did not throw it across the room. I did not smash my fist into the kitchen cabinetry. I did not let out a loud, agonizing scream of rage that would terrify the innocent children playing just 20 feet away. Instead, right there in the quiet silence of my kitchen, I felt a deep, profound shift occur inside my ribcage. It was not the volatile, explosive rage of a foolish man losing control. It was the cold, highly analytical, razor-sharp fury of a seasoned structural engineer who has just discovered that the contractors he trusted have built his family's sanctuary out of rotten, structurally compromised timber. It was the exact, terrifying kind of anger that instantly lowers your heart rate, makes your calloused hands completely steady, and sharpens every single cognitive faculty inside your brain to razor edge. I looked out the kitchen window toward the gray autumn sky, my jaw locked into iron. But as I stood there processing the horrific reality of their Aspen trip, I made a silent, unbreakable promise to the memory of my brother Bill. The boundaries of unconditional parental trust were officially, permanently destroyed. And before this long, dark weekend was over, I was going to systematically inspect every single inch of the rotten life my daughter and her husband had built behind my back, and then I was going to tear the entire structure down right to the dirt. I spent the remainder of that Saturday in a calm, emotionally detached posture, performing the role of the devoted grandfather while my mind operated with the high-speed clarity of a structural engineer analyzing a compromised foundation. My love for those two innocent children remained the unblemished center of my universe. But beneath my warm grandfatherly smile, my mind was running diagnostic checks on every interaction I had shared with my daughter over the past 5 years. Once the evening sun dipped below the western horizon, and the suburban house fell into deep, uninterrupted quiet, I knew where my technical inspection must begin. In his arrogant haste to catch his private jet to Colorado, Derek had forgotten to engage the deadbolt. I stepped inside and switched on the brass desk lamp, sitting in the corner, to look around that pretentious room and realize I had raised a woman whose moral compass valued this empty show of wealth over basic familial loyalty, or her father's sacred grief caused a suffocating ache inside my chest. I pushed the sorrow aside and sat down in Derek's plush high-backed leather executive chair. I pulled firmly on the handle, but the mechanism was locked tight as a bank vault. A normal widower would have stopped right there, thwarted by the steel. It took less than 15 seconds of delicate physical manipulation. The brass pins clicked into proper alignment, the locking cam snapped back, and I pulled the heavy steel drawer open. Resting inside the dark metal compartment on top of old tax folders was a thick, professionally bound manila document file. My heart hammered against my ribs as I lifted the heavy folder onto the polished desk and opened the cover. The very first document inside was a comprehensive residential property appraisal report, complete with high-resolution architectural photographs of my front porch, yard, and detached workshop. At the bottom of the summary page, the firm had formally assigned a current market valuation to my life's work. 1,800,000. A chilling warning bell rang through my mind. I had definitively paid off the final mortgage balance on that Craftsman property 15 years ago, right after Diane passed away, utilizing my retirement savings to ensure I possessed a completely unburdened, clear title legacy for my daughter to inherit without stress. I flipped rapidly past the appraisal summary, but what greeted my eyes on the very next document made the blood freeze in my veins. Printed across the top heading in capitalized black ink were 7 words that struck my heart like a physical blow. Home Equity Line of Credit Agreement. My breathing became shallow and rapid. A home equity line of credit, a HELOC, is a powerful financial instrument, allowing a property owner to borrow liquid cash by pledging the accumulated equity of their home as direct collateral to the bank. The approved principal loan limit printed across the middle section read, $600,000. Z0. $600,000 blurred across the paper as intense vertigo washed over my brain. It was an astronomical, life-destroying debt. I had never spoken to a loan officer from that bank, never stepped inside that branch, and certainly never signed an application wagering my sanctuary to fund whatever lavish venture Derek and Natalie were pursuing. I turned the thick pages with desperate urgency until I reached the final signature and notarization page. And sitting directly beside that forged signature-making, the fraudulent $600,000 loan completely binding and enforceable, was the dark blue raised ink seal of an official, state-registered Illinois notary public, accompanied by the signature and registration stamp of the witnessing officer. I sat back in the leather chair, staring blindly at the blue notary seal while my mind reeled from the sheer audacity of the crime sitting on the desk. The answer was not a simple brute force forgery executed in a back alley. It was a dangerous, sophisticated legal weapon I had willingly handed directly to my own daughter. 5 years ago, I experienced a minor blood pressure scare while working inside my garage workshop, forcing me to spend 48 hours under cardiac observation at the local hospital. And then, while I was physically exhausted, heavily medicated with sedatives, and emotionally vulnerable from paternal love, she presented me with a thick legal document prepared by an attorney, a standard durable medical and financial power of attorney. With tears streaming down her cheeks, she swore on Diane's sacred memory that the document was nothing more than a necessary, highly responsible safety net, a simple legal precaution allowing her to make emergency medical decisions and pay my basic household bills in the unlikely event I was ever comatose or severely incapacitated. I took the pen she offered and signed my full legal name, willingly granting her absolute, comprehensive legal authority to act as my lawful agent in any and all financial, real estate, and legal capacities. That signed document had never been intended as a loving safety net for an aging father. It was a loaded financial weapon she kept hidden in her pocket for 5 years, waiting patiently for the exact right moment to pull the trigger. She had ruthlessly weaponized my mortality, my vulnerability, and my paternal love to turn my Craftsman home into an ATM for her husband. The engineer inside my brain demanded concrete data right away. I needed to check whether that $600,000 was sitting as an untouched credit limit, or if the wound had already been drained. But directly below them sat a newly generated linked account labeled Home Equity Line of Credit, Craftsman Property. I stared at the numerical figures displayed beside the header. Approved credit limit, $600. 0 available credit remaining. 0. Current principal balance owed, $600. 0. My heart skipped an erratic beat, and cold numbness spread down my arms. The recipient destination listed right beside the electronic routing code was an unfamiliar corporate entity registered as Apex Holdings LLC. $600,000 of my hard-earned equity, representing the physical sanctuary where I raised my child and loved my wife, had vanished via electronic wire to an anonymous corporate shell. I sat back in the executive chair, staring up at the abstract artwork lining the walls. My heavy grief over Bill's passing remained anchored inside my soul, but a much sharper emotion rapidly took over every fiber of my being. Pure, cold, unyielding resolve. I opened my contacts directory and stopped on 2 words: Jonathan Pierce. Jonathan Pierce was a senior, high-powered corporate litigator operating out of a penthouse law firm in the downtown Loop, specializing in complex financial fraud and high-stakes federal litigation. When the project finished and Arthur's wealth was saved, young Jonathan Pierce shook my hand with tears in his eyes, giving me his private cellular number and swearing on his family's honor that if Harrison Cole ever needed anything, I only ever had to make one phone call. I pressed the call button next to Jonathan's name. I leveled my vocal cords into the calm, analytical tone of an engineer reporting a critical site failure, detailing the entire nightmare. Bill's death, Natalie and Derek dropping off the grandchildren under the pretext of a New York merger, discovering via GPS tracking they had chartered a jet to snowboard in Aspen, the forged $600,000 HELOC, the residential appraisal, the weaponized power of attorney, and the outgoing wire transfer to Apex Holdings LLC. Jonathan immediately shifted into the role of a master litigator going to war. I heard him walking to his home study and the mechanical clattering of his computer keyboard booting up. It is an anonymous shell company registered in Delaware exactly 3 weeks ago, complete with a commercial P.O. box and a paid privacy shield. He paused, his typing intensifying as he cross-referenced underlying tax identification filings and banking routing codes. A heavy sigh echoed through the speaker. That shell company was quietly incorporated by a subsidiary corporate law firm representing your son-in-law, Derek Cole. Derek is the sole beneficial owner controlling the bank accounts of Apex Holdings LLC. I tightened my grip on the phone in deep confusion. Why would Derek go through illegal, criminal lengths to steal the equity out of my residential house? Jonathan? If his commercial brokerage is struggling during a real estate downturn, there are standard corporate bankruptcy mechanisms. Why forge my name and commit federal bank fraud to siphon $600,000 into a hidden shell account? The aggressive typing on Jonathan's end reached a fever pitch as he initiated a comprehensive civil and criminal litigation search against Derek's brokerage firm across federal and state dockets. He has been systematically embezzling escrow funds and siphoning millions of dollars from major private equity investors, using funds taken from new investors to pay fake returns to the old ones, all while skimming massive percentages to fund his personal, lavish lifestyle. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together with horrifying clarity. The custom Italian suits, the gold watches, the luxury German sedans, and the private jet charters to Aspen were funded entirely by stolen investor cash and corporate embezzlement. And right now, the entire house of cards is collapsing directly on top of him, Jonathan explained, his voice razor-sharp. If Derek fails to deposit that exact liquid sum into the court registry by next Tuesday, the investor's legal counsel has been authorized to turn their entire mountain of forensic embezzlement evidence over to the United States Attorney's Office and the FBI for immediate federal criminal indictment. My breath completely stopped. The $600,000 stolen from the equity of my Craftsman house was not a business investment. It was dirty, desperate blood money. And my own daughter had actively participated in forging my signature and pledging my life's masterpiece to save her criminal husband from wearing a prison uniform. "All right, Jonathan," I said, my voice steady as iron. "We know exactly what they did and where the money went. How do we immediately contact the bank's fraud department, freeze that wire transfer inside Apex Holdings, and report this forgery to the police?" Suddenly, the rapid typing on Jonathan's keyboard stopped completely. The heavy silence stretched on for 10 agonizing seconds. "I want you to open your email inbox on your phone right now. I just downloaded and forwarded you the official state family court docket quietly filed last Friday afternoon, scheduled for an emergency hearing first thing next Monday morning. I minimized the banking app and opened my personal email. The opening page displayed the embossed seal of the Illinois State Family Court System above the heading, "In the matter of the conservatorship of Harrison Cole petitioner, Natalie Cole, respondent." Harrison Cole. I stared at those words, feeling the air leave my lungs as though struck by a falling steel beam. She drove me to every appointment, positioned her chair right next to mine, and answered the diagnostic questions before I could open my mouth, claiming with tearful eyes that I was misplacing keys, leaving the gas stove burning overnight, and getting hopelessly disoriented during routine morning walks around my neighborhood. I realized with crushing force that she had never been worried about my cognitive decline. She had been methodically building a false clinical paper trail to permanently steal my absolute freedom. I was reading a description of a deranged madman who belonged permanently locked behind the steel doors of a psychiatric asylum, not the quiet structural engineer who spent his weekends crafting wooden birdhouses with his grandchildren. And the final prayer for relief outlined at the conclusion laid bare her ultimate objective. If the judge approved this emergency motion on Monday morning, Natalie Cole would instantly be granted absolute legal authority to liquidate my remaining retirement savings, take permanent physical possession of my Craftsman house, ratify the $600,000 HELOC without opposition, and forcefully commit me to a restricted psychiatric care facility entirely against my will for the remainder of my natural life. I would become a helpless prisoner in a medical institution, completely silenced, while they lived on the cash stolen from my foundation. I sat motionless in the chair, forcing my brain to analyze the legal document not as a heartbroken father, but as a structural engineer evaluating opposing blueprints. They needed a dramatic, violent catalyst. I lowered my phone, my eyes staring into the shadows as my brain calculated the timeline with mathematical precision. Why would Derek and Natalie book a private charter flight to Aspen on Friday morning, leaving their children behind exactly 48 hours before their emergency conservatorship hearing opened in family court on Monday morning? They needed me to snap. To secure that emergency conservatorship order on Monday morning, they desperately needed high-definition proof that I was a volatile, violent, unstable madman incapable of controlling his rage. How would they prove it to a judge while sitting 2,000 miles away on a snowy mountain in Colorado? I stood up and walked toward a sleek silver laptop resting on a side credenza near the window. Derek constantly mocked standard cybersecurity protocols, frequently leaving his personal devices resting in sleep mode because he hated waiting for operating systems to reboot. The file name typed across the track read, "Legal Strategy Session, Cole Conservatorsh." I retrieved a pair of Derek's noise-canceling over-ear studio headphones from the credenza drawer, plugged the jack into the side port, and pressed play on the interface. Unless you present irrefutable, undeniable visual or documented evidence that your father poses an immediate, volatile physical danger to himself or his grandchildren right now, the presiding judge will reject the emergency motion and order an independent geriatric psychiatric evaluation that will take 60 days, which will stall your timeline, open his banking records, and expose the $600,000 home equity line of credit you secured last week. Then, I heard my daughter's voice enter the recording, vibrating across the high-definition audio track with a chilling, calculated malice that made my skin crawl. "We are going to deliver the absolute, undeniable proof of his violent, unstable breakdown right to your desk by Sunday evening before the Monday hearing opens." I gripped the edge of the credenza as Natalie proceeded to outline her psychological master plan with the detached precision of a military commander coordinating a slaughter. "We are going to dump our 2 children directly into his lap at the last second and force him to stay home and babysit them, forcing him to miss his beloved brother's funeral entirely." She let out a soft, dark chuckle that echoed inside my ears. "When you play that footage for the family court judge on Monday morning, showing a deranged old man violently screaming and destroying his house around 2 terrified young grandchildren, the judge will have absolutely no choice but to sign the emergency conservatorship order immediately to protect our family." My breath caught in my throat. How could they capture high-definition video and audio inside my home while 2,000 miles away in Aspen? Those cameras run continuously 24 hours a day, capturing every square inch of the living room, kitchen, and dining areas. The hidden cameras will catch every single second of his breakdown in perfect audio and video. A deafening, high-pitched ringing frequency completely overwhelmed my eardrums, drowning out the digital track. I slowly raised my head, adjusting my posture as if stretching my tired neck, and allowed my gaze to drift casually upward across the contemporary artwork, tracing the paths of the ceiling, molding right toward the exact center of the office ceiling. Positioned directly above Derek's heavy mahogany executive desk, mounted flush against the white drywall, was what appeared to be a standard circular white plastic residential smoke detector. I stared intently up at the small slatted plastic ventilation grates of the detector. A high-definition wide-angle camera lens, surrounded by a sensitive micro-condenser microphone, powered directly through the home's primary electrical grid. My first raw human instinct was violently destructive. But I did not move a single muscle, twitch a finger, or allow even the slightest ripple of anger to disturb the serene, calm mask across my weathered face. The 40-year veteran structural engineer inside my mind immediately took complete command over my physical body, suppressing the raw emotional agony of a betrayed widower father. You have to step back with complete emotional detachment, carefully analyze the complex blueprint, systematically map the entire structural grid, locate every single hidden support pillar, holding the toxic framework together, and then, with absolute, quiet, surgical precision, you execute a controlled demolition that safely isolates the innocent bystanders and brings the entire rotten edifice crashing down directly onto the heads of the architects who built it. I slowly lowered my gaze from the ceiling, letting my shoulders drop into a relaxed slump as if merely an exhausted old grandfather overcome by fatigue. I walked down the hallway to the guest bedroom, checked one last time on the peaceful breathing of my sleeping grandchildren, and then lay down on top of my bedspread in the pitch dark, staring straight up at the ceiling until the first gray light of dawn began to creep across the windowsill. They desperately needed a grieving, out of control, violent old man to lose his mind on camera by Sunday afternoon, so they could steal my life by Monday morning. And when the steel jaws of their own digital trap finally snapped shut, they were going to discover that they had locked themselves inside, right alongside me. When Sunday morning dawned bright and cold over the Chicago suburbs, I rose from my bed at 5 o'clock with the quiet, methodical precision of an engineer executing a complex site demolition. I knew with absolute certainty that every move I made was being recorded by the high-definition hidden cameras wired throughout the house. To the unblinking lenses of the hidden cameras, I presented a picture of complete grandfatherly serenity. A network of high-resolution digital feeds cannot simply beam gigabytes of raw video files over standard Wi-Fi to a cloud server in Aspen without severely choking the home's router bandwidth or triggering data alerts. There had to be a centralized physical hardware recording hub hidden somewhere inside the property, a dedicated network-attached storage server capturing and archiving the live footage. Once breakfast was finished, and Leo and Mia were settled in the formal living room, watching their favorite Sunday morning cartoon specials, I casually walked over to the basement access door, near the laundry room. I bypassed the main storage shelving and walked straight into the enclosed mechanical room containing the furnace, water heater, and electrical service panels. Resting tucked away on top of a reinforced wooden shelf directly above the primary 200-amp circuit breaker panel, neatly hidden behind a stack of old HVAC replacement filters, sat a compact, humming black metal tower. It was a commercial-grade, multi-bay network-attached storage server, connected directly to the home's main electrical feed and hardwired into the central data hub via heavy-duty Ethernet cables running through the ceiling joists. I stood in front of the humming black server, watching the green status LEDs blink rapidly across the hard drive bays as it actively recorded the live video feeds from the upstairs smoke detectors. Derek had thought himself a technical genius, but he had made the classic mistake of every arrogant amateur. He had left the physical hardware entirely unprotected inside the homeowner's personal domain. I reached to the back panel of the server, bypassed the network lock using my compact flathead pick to release the mechanical bay latches, and carefully pulled the two primary high-capacity solid-state hard drives directly out of their slots. The green recording lights instantly ceased blinking. The live surveillance network across my house was officially dead. I carried the 2 solid-state drives upstairs to my private bedroom, retrieved my ruggedized external data reader and personal laptop from my closet, and plugged the drives directly into my system. As the storage volume mounted onto my screen, I discovered that Derek and Natalie had been utilizing this local server not just for the weekend's hidden surveillance, but as a central backup repository for their personal digital devices and home security recordings over the past 2 years. I opened the primary video directory and began scrolling through the chronological archives. What I found inside those stored video and audio folders was a breathtaking, horrifying treasure trove of self-incriminating criminal evidence. There were crystal-clear living room security recordings dating back 3 months, showing Natalie and Derek sitting on the leather sofa, drinking wine while laughing hysterically as they mocked elderly real estate clients they had just swindled out of their retirement deposits. There were high-definition audio tracks from Derek's phone backups, capturing him coordinating multi-million-dollar wire transfers to offshore accounts to conceal stolen private equity funds from federal auditors. And then, stored inside a dedicated folder labeled HELOC documentation, I found a high-resolution video file recorded 10 days prior right inside my kitchen while I was out buying groceries. Right beside her stood Derek, holding a brass notary stamp he had illegally procured through his subsidiary shell firm, laughing smugly as he stamped the blue ink seal right next to her forged signature. They had recorded their own federal bank fraud in high definition. I pulled out my phone and immediately dialed Jonathan Pierce's direct cellular number. He answered on the very first ring, his voice crisp and focused from his law office, where he had spent the entire night assembling our counteroffensive. "Harrison," Jonathan said sharply, "I am sitting with 2 senior financial investigators from our firm right now. How is the situation at the house?" "The situation is completely under my control, Jonathan," I replied calmly. "I just dismantled their hidden surveillance network and extracted the local storage server from my basement. I am currently holding high-definition, time-stamped video and audio files capturing Natalie physically forging my signature onto the $600,000 home equity line of credit contract, while Derek illegally applies the notary seal." Jonathan let out a sharp, triumphant exclamation over the phone that echoed with fierce satisfaction. "Good God, Harrison! While my team was running the title search on your Craftsman property this morning to prepare our emergency injunction against the bank lien, we uncovered something that completely changes the battlefield." He paused, taking a breath. "Harrison, do you remember when you met with your primary estate planning attorney, Marcus Vance, exactly 2 years ago, right after you retired from the union?" I blinked, my brow furrowing as my mind traveled back 2 years to a quiet afternoon inside Marcus Vance's modest law office across town. "Yes, Jonathan, I met with Marcus to update my last will and testament and establish clear inheritance designations for Leo and Mia. And during that exact meeting, Harrison," Jonathan continued, his voice ringing with absolute triumph, "Marcus Vance had you review all existing legal powers and designations attached to your name. When he discovered that broad, durable medical and financial power of attorney you had signed for Natalie in the hospital 3 years earlier, Marcus warned you that having an open, unconditional power of attorney floating around was a dangerous financial liability for a retired widower." A profound, lightning bolt shockwave of realization struck my brain as the memory suddenly clicked into place. "And Marcus drafted a formal, comprehensive revocation of power of attorney," I whispered, my voice thick with awe. "I signed it right there across his desk. We formally revoked and terminated every single legal authority granted to Natalie under that 2019 hospital document." "Precisely," Jonathan boomed across the line. "That means the 2019 power of attorney was completely, legally null and void the moment Natalie walked into that bank last week." The mathematical perfection of our legal position crystallized in my mind. The underlying legal instrument she claimed gave her authority had been officially revoked and dead across state records for 24 months. "Because the power of attorney was legally void," Jonathan explained, his voice razor-sharp with prosecutorial intensity, "the $600,000 credit line approved by the bank is entirely illegal and void ab initio. More importantly, when Natalie used that dead document to process a $600,000 electronic wire transfer into Apex Holdings across state lines, she and Derek committed major, unmitigated federal wire fraud and bank fraud. I felt a cold, calm certainty settle across my shoulders. "When do we strike, Jonathan?" "Right now," Jonathan commanded. When I presented the forensic tracing of Derek's 4-year Ponzi scheme alongside the forged $600,000 wire transfer into his Delaware shell company, the federal magistrate signed off on immediate, high-priority federal arrest warrants and asset seizure orders for both Derek and Natalie Cole. Jonathan paused, his tone dropping into a serious protective register. "And the exact moment they step across your threshold, the trap snaps shut forever." I checked my watch. The glowing dials read 10 o'clock in the morning. "There is just one non-negotiable condition, Jonathan," I said firmly. "My grandchildren, Leo and Mia, cannot be inside this house when the federal agents arrive. I will not allow those innocent children to watch their parents be put in iron handcuffs or traumatized by armed tactical units." "I completely agree," Jonathan replied. "Secure the children safely off property before 5 o'clock this afternoon. I will coordinate with the FBI field supervisor. Our federal arrest units will surround the perimeter by 5:30 and wait for my direct signal once the kids are safe." We disconnected the call. I immediately dialed my closest, most trusted neighbors living just 2 houses down the street, Richard and Martha Sterling. Richard was a retired high school principal, and Martha was a retired pediatric nurse. They had lived on our block for 30 years, had known my late wife Diane dearly, and loved Leo and Mia like their own grandchildren. I walked over to their house while the children watched cartoons, sat down at their kitchen table, and quietly explained that a severe family medical and legal emergency had arisen involving Natalie and Derek, requesting that they take Leo and Mia for a fun afternoon at the City Science Museum, followed by a sleepover at their home tonight. Richard and Martha did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. Seeing the serious iron look in my eyes, Martha immediately packed a basket of snacks, walked back to my house with me, and cheerfully announced to Leo and Mia that Grandpa had arranged a surprise Sunday adventure at the Science Museum. At exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon, after kissing both children gently on their foreheads and hugging them tightly to my chest, I watched Richard and Martha drive Leo and Mia safely down the street away from my house. Once the front door clicked shut and the heavy house fell into complete, utter silence, I set about preparing for the final structural demolition. I brewed a fresh, aromatic pot of Earl Grey tea, my daughter's favorite, and set out delicate bone china teacups alongside a plate of butter cookies. And right in the exact center of the polished mahogany coffee table, positioned where the afternoon sun streamed through the front bay window, I placed a neat, orderly stack of documents: the glossy appraisal report of my Craftsman home, the forged $600,000 home equity line of credit contract, the high-definition printed screenshots of them forging my signature from the extracted NAS server, the certified copy of Marcus Vance's 2-year-old power of attorney revocation deed, and the 50-page emergency petition for full conservatorship. Then, I sat down in my favorite leather armchair, folded my rough, calloused hands peacefully in my lap, and waited. At exactly 5:45 p.m., as the autumn twilight began to paint the sky outside in shades of deep purple and gray, the heavy, highly tuned engine of Derek's metallic silver German sedan rumbled aggressively up the long concrete driveway. I sat motionless in my armchair, listening through the quiet house as the car doors clicked open, footsteps approached the porch, and the front door latch turned. They stepped into the entryway, bringing with them the crisp scent of mountain air and expensive cologne. Derek walked directly behind her, carrying 2 heavy, expensive snowboarding bags slung across his shoulders and dropping his keys loudly onto the entryway table. As they walked through the archway into the formal living room, Natalie immediately adjusted her posture, shifting from casual relaxation into her rehearsed, dramatic performance of the exhausted, highly stressed corporate wife returning from a brutal weekend in Manhattan. "Dad?" Natalie called out, looking around the living room with widened eyes, her voice trembling with synthetic concern. "Where are Leo and Mia? We just got back from O'Hare. The New York merger meetings were absolutely grueling," 16 hours straight in boardroom negotiations. We are completely exhausted. Where are the kids? I remained seated calmly in my leather armchair, looking right up at her tanned face without blinking. I reached out, picked up the bone china teapot, and slowly poured 3 steaming cups of Earl Grey tea onto the table. "The children are entirely safe, Natalie," I said, my voice smooth, quiet, and completely level. "They are having a wonderful sleepover with Richard and Martha down the street." I wanted to ensure they were completely out of earshot so we could have a quiet, adult conversation about your trip. Derek dropped his heavy snowboarding bags onto the floor with a loud thud, crossing his arms over his chest as he walked forward with his signature patronizing smirk. "A sleepover? Harrison, we don't have time for neighborly visits right now. We are exhausted from flying back from Manhattan. Where is my laptop? Why is the Wi-Fi router flashing upstairs?" I took a slow sip of my hot tea, set the cup down onto the saucer with a soft ceramic click, and gestured gently toward the center of the mahogany coffee table. "Before we discuss your Wi-Fi, Derek," I said calmly, "I thought you and Natalie might want to review the paperwork I spent my afternoon organizing. Please, have a seat and take a look right there on the table." Natalie frowned, her brow furrowing in irritation as she stepped closer to the coffee table. She reached down and picked up the top document, sitting on the neatly stacked pile. I watched the exact, precise microsecond the biological reaction occurred. Her eyes bulged wide with absolute, unadulterated terror as she stared down at the crisp, high-definition color screenshot, showing her standing inside my kitchen with a pen in her hand, physically copying my signature onto the $600 silks and dollars home equity line of credit contract, while Derek stood beside her, holding his illegal notary stamp. "What?" Natalie choked out, the word escaping her throat as a ragged, terrified whisper, as her trembling hands dropped the screenshot and fell onto the document right below it. The certified, state-stamped revocation of power of attorney, executed by Marcus Vance 2 years ago. "You see, Natalie," I said softly, leaning forward across the armchair with the cold, absolute authority of a man whose foundation is built on bedrock. "I know everything. I know that you didn't fly to a corporate boardroom in New York City on Friday morning. I tracked your phone directly to Executive Terminal 4, where you boarded a private twin-engine charter jet to go snowboarding in Aspen, while I sat alone weeping over my brother Bill's empty grave." Derek stumbled back 2 steps across the Persian rug, his face turning dark crimson as his arrogant smirk vanished, replaced by sheer panic. "Harrison, what did you do? Did you hack into my computer?" "I didn't need to hack anything, Derek," I replied coldly, pointing a calloused finger straight toward the ceiling above us. "I listened to your entire 48-minute recorded audio session with your family court litigation lawyer from last Friday afternoon." Natalie began to physically shake from head to toe, staggering back against the sofa as her breathing turned into rapid, hyperventilating gasps. "Dad, please let me explain." "Explain what, Natalie?" I asked, my voice rising just enough to command the room like a heavy steel beam dropping into place. "Explain how you wired my sanctuary with hidden cameras to capture me shouting, so you could walk into family court tomorrow morning with your emergency petition, declare me senile and psychotic, lock me inside a closed-ward psychiatric asylum for the rest of my life, and steal my home." I stood up from my leather armchair, drawing my full 6-foot frame up until I towered over my trembling son-in-law. "Or perhaps you want to explain how you forged my signature to siphon $600,000 of my paid-off equity into Derek's Delaware shell company, Apex Holdings LLC, specifically to cover up the 4-year multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme embezzlement that 3 private equity groups are suing him for in federal court right now?" Derek let out a ragged cry of desperation, lunging forward toward the coffee table with his hands outstretched to grab the documents. "Give me those papers. You old fool, you don't understand what you've done. Those contracts are private property." Before his fingers could even touch the mahogany wood, the sudden, sharp, heavy screech of vehicle tires barking against concrete echoed loudly from outside our living room windows. Suddenly, the front yard and long concrete driveway were illuminated by the intense strobing crimson and cobalt blue lights of 4 separate emergency tactical vehicles slicing through the autumn dusk. The heavy oak front door of my house, which I had deliberately left unlocked, swung wide open with a sharp crash that shook the walls. 6 armed, heavily armored special agents, belonging to the United States Federal Bureau of Investigation Financial Crimes Division and the United States Marshals Service, marched rapidly into the entryway, their tactical vests clearly displaying bold yellow FBI lettering across their chests. Right behind the lead tactical supervisor strode Jonathan Pierce, immaculate in a dark charcoal 3-piece suit, carrying a thick leather briefcase and flanked by 2 senior federal prosecutors. Derek Cole, Natalie Cole, the lead FBI supervisory agent, boomed across the living room, his voice carrying absolute, undeniable federal authority. Do not move from where you stand. Keep your hands clearly visible, right where we can see them. Derek let out a high-pitched scream of absolute terror, spinning around toward the back French patio doors as if attempting to flee into the backyard. The sharp, metallic snap of heavy steel handcuffs, ratcheting tightly around his wrists, rang through the room like music to my ears. Derek Cole, the federal prosecutor announced cleanly, standing over him with official legal indictments in hand, you are placed under formal federal arrest, pursuant to warrants issued by the United States District Court for the Northern District of Illinois. You are charged with multiple counts of wire fraud, federal bank fraud, interstate transportation of stolen funds, corporate embezzlement, and operating an illegal financial Ponzi scheme under Title 18 of the United States Code. Natalie collapsed onto her knees beside the coffee table, sobbing hysterically, her designer winter parka rustling loudly against the floor, as she looked up at me with tears streaming down her pale cheeks. She raised her trembling hands, reaching out to grab the hem of my faded flannel shirt. Daddy, please, she screamed, her voice cracking in wild agony. Don't let them take us. Tell them it's a mistake. I am your daughter, Daddy. Please save me. I looked down at the woman, kneeling on the rug before me. But right then, looking down into her weeping eyes, I saw only the cold, unblinking red LED indicator light of the hidden smoke detector camera she had installed to lock me in an asylum while my brother was lowered into his grave. I gently, deliberately pulled the hem of my flannel shirt completely out of her desperate grasp, stepping back 2 full paces until I stood shoulder to shoulder with Jonathan Pierce. You stopped being my daughter the exact moment you forged my name to steal the foundation I built for your children. Natalie, I said, my voice completely devoid of anger, entirely cold and calm as winter frost. And you sealed your own fate the morning you tried to weaponize my brother Bill's death to lock me in a psychiatric cage. An FBI special agent stepped forward, firmly grasping Natalie by her upper arms, lifting her off the rug, and placing cold steel handcuffs securely around her wrists. Natalie Cole, the agent stated clearly, you are under federal arrest for conspiracy to commit bank fraud, forgery of a federal loan instrument, and aggravated identity theft. I stood silently beside Jonathan across the living room, watching with absolute emotional detachment as the federal tactical agents led my weeping, screaming daughter and her cursing, handcuffed husband out the front door, down the porch steps, and securely into the reinforced steel back compartments of the waiting federal transport vans. The strobing red and blue emergency lights reflected off the dark windows of my house for a few final moments before the sirens wailed to life. The tires turned, and the convoy sped away down the suburban street, disappearing around the corner and out of my life forever. When the heavy front door finally clicked shut behind the departing agents and prosecutors, Jonathan Pierce remained standing inside my quiet living room. He walked over to the coffee table, picked up the bone china teapot, poured himself a fresh cup of Earl Grey tea, and raised it toward me with deep, profound respect. The federal freezing injunction against the $6,000 home equity line of credit has already been formally served and executed by the United States Attorney's Office, Harrison, Jonathan said softly, taking a sip. The family court judge signed an immediate, permanent restraining order barring Natalie or Derek from ever contacting you or stepping foot within 500 yards of your property or your grandchildren. I let out a long, deep, steadying breath, feeling the heavy, suffocating iron weight that had compressed my chest for 3 days finally lift away, leaving my lungs clear and strong. And what happens to their financial standing now, Jonathan? They have lost absolutely everything, Harrison, Jonathan replied firmly. When Natalie is eventually released on federal bail pending trial, she will be left completely penniless, stripped of her designer wardrobe, and forced to live in a tiny, cramped studio apartment while facing federal prison sentences that carry up to 20 years behind bars. "And the grandchildren?" I asked, my voice softening as my thoughts immediately turned to the two innocent souls sleeping peacefully down the street at Richard and Martha's house. Jonathan smiled warmly, pulling a thick, freshly bound legal folder from his leather briefcase and setting it gently onto the mahogany coffee table. "Working alongside your estate planner Marcus Vance today, our firm has officially drafted and established the Harrison and Diane Cole Irrevocable Generation Skipping Trust. Every single dollar of your retirement savings, your union pension investments, and the unencumbered $1,800,000 equity of this historic craftsman sanctuary have been permanently transferred into this protected trust structure." He tapped the cover of the folder. "The sole exclusive legal beneficiaries of this trust are your grandchildren, Leo and Mia Cole. Furthermore, until this federal criminal trial is resolved, the family court has granted you, alongside Richard and Martha Sterling, primary legal physical guardianship over Leo and Mia to ensure their lives remain completely safe, stable, and filled with love." I reached out, placed my calloused hands squarely onto the thick leather trust folder, and felt the solid, unyielding structural strength of a foundation built to last for generations. "Thank you, Jonathan," I said quietly. "You honored your father's memory today." Jonathan shook my hand firmly. "No, Harrison. You honored your brother's memory today. You protected the family he died to give you." The next morning, on Monday at exactly 8 o'clock, when the heavy iron gates of the Chicago Historic Cemetery swung open under a bright, crisp autumn sky, I drove my pickup truck slowly through the quiet, winding pathways. I parked under the shade of a towering, centuries-old oak tree and walked across the damp, morning-dewed grass until I reached the freshly turned earth of my older brother, Bill's grave. The beautiful floral wreaths from Sunday's funeral service still covered the mound, their vibrant petals glowing in the morning sunlight. I stood at the foot of his grave, dressed in my clean Union jacket and work boots, holding two thick, heavy glass bottles of imported Irish Guinness Stout, Bill's absolute favorite drink after a 16-hour day, pouring concrete in the winter chill. I unscrewed the metal caps, tilted the first dark bottle over the rich soil, and watched the thick, creamy foam soak deeply into the earth above his casket. Then, I raised the second bottle toward the open blue sky in silent, eternal toast. "I'm sorry I couldn't stand by your casket yesterday morning, Billy," I whispered into the crisp morning breeze, my voice steady, clear, and filled with profound peace. "They thought because my hair was gray and my hands were scarred, I would just break under the weight." I took a slow, deep drink of the dark stout, feeling its bitter warmth settle directly into my bones. I walked forward and rested my rough, calloused palm firmly against the cool gray stone of his temporary grave marker, feeling the solid, enduring granite beneath my fingers. "But you taught me how to inspect a foundation, big brother," I said softly, a gentle smile touching my lips as the sunlight broke through the oak branches above. "The foundation is solid, clear, and standing strong forever." I turned around and walked slowly back to my pickup truck, my shoulders light and my head held high, ready to drive home, make breakfast for Leo and Mia, and spend the rest of my life watching over the sacred family my brother gave everything to protect.